The track I'm walking on is Mrs. Bryce's walking track, which leads from the homestead down to the cemetery, where two of her children are buried, and you would find her walking this track to the cemetery most evenings. Just imagine how difficult this must have been for her, to visit the graves of the children she gave birth to and now buried in her backyard. It was thought that Ellen died of scarlet fever at the age of 3, but in later years Mrs. Bryce believed it was cholera that caused her death. Tragedy again struck the family 16 years later with the death of Jessie. Shortly before Jessie's death, Mrs. Bryce had taken her to a doctor in the East Gippsland town of Stratford, only to be told that nothing could be done for Jessie. The loving and caring mother, Annie, said to Jessie, "If I could give you one last wish, what would that be?" And Jessie replied, "I just want to be taken back home." Imagine what it would have been like for Annie on the return trip home with her dying daughter. Jessie died 3 weeks later, just short of her 22nd birthday. Sadly, on May the 24th, 1902, William Bryce died at the age of 67. William had journeyed off to see his daughter's grandchildren, and on the first night of his journey, William stayed at the hotel in Iguana Creek, where he became violently ill, and before morning, William had died, resulting from kidney disease. It was the end of a remarkable life. Mrs. Bryce, Annie, died at the age of 78 in 1914 and is buried with her daughter Jessie at her request. So Wallace, after Annie died, what happened to Wonnangatta from then on?
The two oldest boys, David and Alan, they both had properties down at Stratford, and they used to come back to the homestead to work, but they wouldn't sell the place until Mrs. Bryce died. But after she died, they sold out to Phillips and Ritchie. It was about 1914, and they had it right up until Barclay was murdered. They were so disappointed with Barclay's murder that they sold out to a syndicate. Eventually they sold it to two of the Allen brothers, and then it was sold eventually to Guy Brothers. Guy Brothers had it for quite a long time, in fact right up until 1972. In 1972 it was sold to Bob Gilder from Glenfarclas Station, because that's in 1988 went to the Victorian government.
Now, one thing that's very unique to down this area is this little flower here called the Wonnangatta orchid. Now, after 150 years of cattle grazing in these areas, it still exists, and that's pretty special, I think. So the original homestead's not there today, so what eventually happened to that?
Oh, the homestead was burnt down in 1955 when Guy Brothers owned the place. I asked Arthur Guy, who did he think it was a deliberate act or not, and he says that more than likely it was bushwalkers had been into the house, and of course they always left it open. And he thinks that the fireplace in the kitchen was so built up with ashes and so forth that when these walkers had left in the morning, they'd lit the fire, made their cup of tea and toast or whatever, and then they'd left. And after they left, probably a stick rolled out onto the floor, and of course it was just like tinder, and away she'd go, the whole lot.
Prior to 1988, when cattle once grazed in Wonnangatta, this short lush grass that's down by the Conglomerate Creek once graced the valley. It'd be great to see Wonnangatta return to its former glory.
All the flats looked like a lawn, different to what it is today. The cattle made it such a beautiful place. They kept the grass short all the time over those flats, and it always looked fantastic. The last of the cattle were taken out, and from then on there's no cattle, no nothing, and the grass in the valley was up about 2 feet, 2.5 feet high, and now you could hardly even walk through it now. The cattle would be great if they did come back. Yeah.
The organisation you're involved with the Friends of Wonnangatta, what's that all about?
When the land was taken over from Bob Gilder in 1988 by the Kerner government, meant that we couldn't do what we wanted to do any time then. Under the jurisdiction of parks, national parks, we had to do what they say. So that's why we formed the Friends of Wonnangatta.
And how many members have you got?
Probably got about 120, 130. They vary quite a bit and they're spread out a lot. You know, there's a lot of them in Melbourne. We've got them even in Wodonga and Albury, even Sydney, we've got members.
And what's the main involvement with going down into there with the group? What do they do when they go in there?
Our main activity is to look after the cemetery. Because it's a heritage place now, we've put in all that heritage fencing. We did that for parks, we've done all that, and we look after the homestead. We've marked out the old homestead where it used to be, where the rooms used to be. And we try to keep that weed free. And sometimes when you drive in there, when the hop scrub is out, all the gorse is out, it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah.